Hi everyone, I'm Celeste. Welcome to my BookTube channel. Today I am here to discuss a summer haul, a haul for the month of June. This isn't going to be my only haul, however, and it's not going to be exhaustive of all the books I hope to read this summer because I do have a few other special videos planned to go over some other titles that I will not be going over today. For example, Jane Austen July. So I do that every year, and so that will be a separate tag. And in addition to that, I have, a couple others that I want to do. I haven't quite got them all sorted out yet, but I do have a bunch of books which are not in the pile I'm sharing with you today. So let's consider this a first summer haul. And the first book that I wanted to share with you, I'll first go over the books that I did read and that I am in the process of reading, and then I'm going to go over a sort of pile of possibilities for what I might be reading throughout the course of the rest of June, July, and August. So here we go. The first one that I did finish is Elizabeth and Her German Garden, and that is, of course, by Elizabeth von Arnim. And so this is a book that's published by Warbler Press. There are many beautiful editions of Elizabeth von Arnim's works. I'm sure you can find them available online or in your local bookstore or in your local thrift shop. I thought this was a particularly gorgeous edition. I'll just show you the back of it there. Very springy and summery and full of flowers. So Elizabeth von Arnim was born in Australia, and when she was 3, her family moved to London. Then in 1891, she married a Count von Arnim, and they married and had children. They moved into his grand estate in the country in Pomerania, which I think Pomerania is Poland, modern-day Poland. Not sure about that, but I think that's correct. And so it was kind of a deteriorating country estate, a castle in the rough. And this is when Elizabeth von Arnim wrote Elizabeth's German Garden. And Elizabeth and Her German Garden is slightly autobiographical. It's a slightly feminist manifesto given the time period that it was written in, 1898, I believe. It's a very, very simple, I would almost call it a novella. Let's see how many pages it is here. There's a lot of notes in the back as well. It's not even 100 pages, so I would call that a novella. It is done in sort of the form of a journal or diary, and on the surface it is just notes that a married mother is making about loving to go into her garden and the freedom that she finds there. She loves the antiquity of the castle and the wildness that surrounds the county, and particularly her little garden where she feels free and not constrained by the conventions of society. So on the surface it's all about that, but it's also a bit feminist in the sense that it is a place for her on her own where she can think what she wants to think, and she can have some freedom and some control to do things her way as opposed to how others want them. So this is sort of a free space for her to think, and it was fine. It was nice. I didn't love it. I loved The Enchanted April. But, you know, for what it is, it's a nice little meditation. It's well written. You can tell that the author is going to be a talented writer. I would say it's worth reading. I think it would be fun to pair this with Virginia Woolf's A Room of One's Own, which has some similar themes. So yeah, Elizabeth and Her German Garden. And then one of my goals over the course of 2024 and in general is to read more of the Newbery Medal winners for children's literature. And to that end, I have recently acquired a beautiful, beautiful edition of Thimble Summer, and this is by Elizabeth Enright. Look at that, it's so pretty. Let me fix the cover here so I can show it to you properly. I got this for a very, very reasonable price on eBay, and it is in pristine condition. I will show you the inside end papers. Isn't that lovely? This book has marvelous, marvelous, very unique, I think, illustrations, and I will show you an example of those. I love the colors, the bright colors. This is all about a little girl growing up in the Midwest. Her name is Garnet Linden. She does live on a farm in the West, and this book is so delightful. I love books that are just children's books, which are sort of just about growing up and everyday life. And I remember earlier this year, or maybe last December, sharing the Golden Name Day and the Silver Cottage and all of those, and of course the Little House books. This is similar, kind of a long picture book, but in that same vein of just sharing Garnet Linden's everyday life, growing up on the farm, how hot it is, and you can really feel the heat from the way Elizabeth Enright describes it. She's a marvelous, marvelous writer. And I had forgotten how evocative her prose is. She talks about them walking through the dusty dirt. You know, it's the 1930s in the United States, in the West, and, you know, there's, oh my goodness, the legacy of the Dust Bowl and the Depression, and it's pre-World War II, and just things like walking to the general store and going with her brother and friends to go to a swimming hole, and what it's like at night as it starts to get dark and there's bats flying overhead and mosquitoes. And one day when she is out with other kids, she does find a silver thimble in the swimming hole in the mud. And from there on in, her luck begins to change. And it's just such an interesting, heartwarming story of life then. It's definitely a product of its decade, of its time, in terms of the language and references used. But that being said, it is absolutely worth your while. It is a charming read, and it really gives you a portrait of a life that used to be lived in the 30s in the United States in the West, and really, really evocative. So I would recommend Thimble Summer. And another book that I read, this is actually a nonfiction book. This is a very strange book. This is a book called At the Pond, Swimming at the Hampstead Ladies' Pond. And here's the cover of this one. This would be a great little sort of book for your bedside table in the summer months. There's a bunch of writers who are included in this, and I will just sort of show you them on the back here. I'll be honest with you, the only one I recognized of all of these authors is Margaret Drabble. But what this is, I had heard about this on a YouTube channel, and oh, I am not going to remember the name now. It's a gal I just started to watch recently. I will post her information down below. Oh, is it Viv? Sorry. But I will post it down below. And she has fun reviews of sort of offbeat books, and I've written down the titles of several that sounded interesting to me, because she has a very infectious enthusiasm for what she's reading, and she gets really excited about it, and yeah, it was very sweet. And so this was one of the books that she recommended, and so it is just a bunch of quick essays from the perspective of all of these women that go to swim in this Hampstead ladies pond, and it's like a community pond. I'm not sure if I understand quite the concept. If anyone is British out there and knows the difference between a community pond, a swimming pool, and a lido, I would appreciate it. Please explain it to me in the comments below. But this is apparently a natural pond, but it does have steps leading down into it. And I think there is a men's pond, there is a mixed gender pond, and then there is the woman's pond, or the ladies' pond. And this is in London, in Hampstead. And so these are all just really sort of moments of different authors going to swim in this pond, and some of them swim in the winter time and do cold swimming. Some of them swim all year round. Some only come in summer. I think probably for me the most interesting essay in here was by Nell Frizzell, who I have not heard of either, and she is kind of the sometimes lifeguard at the pond, and she is observing all of the other ladies that come to swim here. So there's observations on nature, on human nature, on small group dynamics and interactions, on the wildlife, on what the difference is between swimming in the ladies' pond and swimming in the mixed pond with the men, what the best time of day is to go there. It gets very philosophical at points, but it's fascinating. I'm surprised that I liked it as much as I liked it, because usually if you describe something like this to me, I'd kind of go, pass. But the way it was described by Viv, or the lady who has the channel I will post below, it sounded fascinating, and I was not disappointed. So if you're looking for just like a little book to put in your weekender to take away to the lake, or looking for just a quick read, or something to read little essays at if you're going anywhere this summer, this would be a really great title to take with you. So yeah, At the Pond, and that was nonfiction. The next book I've read in the month of June that I wanted to share with you is a really special one, and that is A Town Like Alice by Nevil Shute. Another beautiful cover. And I really love this vintage classics edition with the red spine. And I had never read anything by Nevil Shute before. And who was it? I think Katie from Books and Things had recommended another Nevil Shute novel called The Pied Piper, or Pied Piper, and I do have that on my TBR list, but this one I was sort of more in the mood for from the description, so I decided to read this first. Now, this is based on a true story about a woman who was a prisoner of war, in fact, a group of women and children who were forced to march during World War II, during Japanese occupation. Now, Nevil Shute did change the location of where it takes place. In the book, it takes place in Malaya, but in reality, the events happened in Sumatra. But it is based on a woman's real life story. And what happened was the Japanese occupied, in the book, Malaya, and they took the men and the husbands and brothers and so forth prisoner. But the women and children, they did not know what to do with. And there was a whole group of them in one of the cities in Malaya. And so they started them on a march on foot, carrying the babies and whatever luggage they could manage. As the novel opens, it is narrated by a solicitor whose name is Noel Strahan, and he is an older man, and he is recounting the story of how he came to know a woman named Jean Paget, and she's just sort of a modest, run-of-the-mill typist, and she has come into some money. And he is trying to locate her and let her know that she has a trust that's been set up for her. And he's charged with handling the estate, and he does meet Jean. And eventually they get to know each other, and she tells her story to him of where she was in Malaya during the war, and of a very special person she met when she was there. And I would say it took me a little bit to get into this novel. The tone is kind of like Noel Strahan himself. It's a bit reserved. It's very well written, but it's a bit formal, a bit reserved. But as you get into it, you kind of realize that that's just his character and his tone and the way he's narrating it. And I really became so invested in this. It's just such a wonderful story. Nevil Shute is really adept at braiding together several narratives and time periods, and he kind of time shifts back and forth between Jean's time in Malaya and the present day, where she's back in London relating the story. And then another part of it takes place elsewhere in the world. And there is another character who becomes predominant in the story as well. One of the characters in this novel is named Joe Harmon. He's a young man that Jean meets. And there's a really touching scene where one night they're sitting together in front of a fire, smoking a cigarette together. And she asks him to talk about his home because it's obvious that he's homesick. And so it's so obvious from the way he describes the area of Australia that he grew up in and where he lives now, that he just finds it the most beautiful place on earth, even though it's stark and a hard life. He's a cattle wringer, kind of a cowboy in Australia. And it's just really, really evocative, the way he describes the mountains and the cattle station. So yeah, it's and Australia will play a larger part later in the novel. And I just loved the descriptions of Australia in this book. It is a story of adversity. It's a story of struggle. It's a story of strength and grace under pressure. It recounts day-to-day life in a war, which ironically can be long periods of boredom and tediousness, punctuated by sudden shocking atrocity. And the irony is that both can take place in the same location. One day there is something atrocious happening as an act of war, and 4 years later, someone can be sitting there and there's a tennis court and a tree and they're sort of having a picnic under the tree. So the same place can be two very different places in war and in peacetime. There is some typical period racism that you would expect from a novel that is written in this time period. And you sort of have to approach this accepting that and understanding that. There's definitely some racist terminology used, and when you consider that it is a part of World War II with the fear of the other and not knowing who is your friend and who is your enemy, there is quite a bit of that. I had to sort of temper my expectations of the book knowing that. But that being said, I really, really loved it. I highly recommend it. And I would definitely give this like a 4.5 out of 5 stars. I thought it was really, really good. And it really got me interested in reading more set during World War II and more books that are set in Australia. A lot of this does take place in Malaya, but another part of it takes place in Australia. So, I would definitely recommend A Town Like Alice. And there is a movie that was made, an old black and white movie. I haven't seen that, but I did rewatch the series that was broadcast on Masterpiece Theater in 1981. And that was starring Helen Marsh, is her name Helen Marsh, I think, and Brian Brown. It's very sort of roughly done. It looks like someone filmed it with just a regular video camera. The production values are not great, but it is a really good series if you're ever interested in watching that. And it's fairly true to this. It follows the book pretty closely. So, yeah, this has a place in my heart. A Town Like Alice. So having just come off reading The Morning Gift by Eva Ibbotson, which was set on the eve of World War II, and I discussed that book very lovingly in my last video, so please do check that out. Loved it. Plan on reading a lot more Eva Ibbotson. But that was set on the eve of World War II, and then A Town Like Alice was also set in World War II, and part of it took place in Australia. And I had a hard time getting into another book after I finished A Town Like Alice, and I couldn't make up my mind if I wanted to read something that was set in Australia or if I wanted to read something that was just sort of from the 1940s. And so I did decide on the latter. So the book that I am currently reading and have just started is The Blank Wall by Elizabeth Sanxay Holding. And this is a gorgeous Persephone Books edition, and they are that sort of lovely silvery dove gray on the outside, very understated, but then inside we have a 1940s furnishing fabric textile, which is just marvelous. And I have just started this, and so far I really am enjoying it very much. This was published in 1947. It's by Elizabeth Sanxay Holding. She is was an American author, and it is set during World War II. There is a woman called Lucia Hawley, and she is sort of the heroine of the story. She's married. Her husband Tom is a commander who is away in the war in the Pacific Theater. And they have 2 children, David and their daughter Bee. And she lives in a small house with her children and with her father, who she's very endeared to. And so her young daughter Bee is having an affair with a married man. And he's kind of not a very nice character. She's met him a few times. He's very seedy. He's much older. He's married, and keeps promising he's going to get a divorce, as the old story goes. So she is trying to discourage her daughter Bee from having this affair with the older man. And the story starts in May, and very quickly turns into a thriller of sorts. So it does take place in May and then over the summer months, I believe. She finds herself in a predicament, and this is the story of what she does once she is in this predicament. I believe this book was also made into a movie starring Tilda Swinton, something like that. I have never seen that. I wanted to read the book first. I am enjoying this and really looking forward to reading the next chapter. It's a bit of a page turner. So yeah, The Blank Wall by Elizabeth Sanxay Holding. That's my current read. And then at some point over the summer, I do hope to get back into my Australia reading. One of the other goals that I set for myself this year was to read books from around the world. And so I was considering this modern book. Now, this is a library book, so forgive the shine, but that is The Dry by Jane Harper. And I had gotten this out for my mother-in-law to read. And she said that she enjoyed it. I know it's also been made into a Netflix series, and I have not seen that. But, you know, I started to read the first chapter of this, and I was getting hooked pretty quickly on it, and I was interested in it. I also did recently watch several series and a couple of full-length movies, which were also set in Australia. Now, let's see. One of those was, what is it called? Mystery Road. And I really enjoyed those. I especially enjoyed season 1 of Mystery Road. The thing I love about some of these crime novels and thrillers that are set in Australia is that in some ways they're very much like Westerns that are set in the US, more of an old style classic Western. And even though I haven't read a lot of those, I did think that I would like to read some for June on the Range, which is a tag I have never participated in, but it really sounds like fun. I may just do it in a very minor way, but I will try to read something in the month of June that is on that theme. But anyway, The Dry by Jane Harper. And then to that end, I do have a couple of books that might work for June on the Range. One I had recently heard someone speaking about, and they really made it sound exciting to me, and that is a classic of American literature. It's often required reading on high school reading lists, but it escaped my radar altogether, and that is True Grit by Charles Portis. So this is an American classic. It is a Western. It's about a little 14-year-old girl named Maddie Ross, and she witnesses, well, I think she witnesses, I don't know if she witnesses it or not, but her father is killed by a guy, and he's robbed, and so Maddie wants to avenge her father's death. And in order to do so, she knows she can't just chase off after this gunman alone. And so she enlists the help of a very rude U.S. Marshal who has one eye, and his name is Rooster Cogburn. And so he becomes her partner in the pursuit of this criminal, and they chase off after him into Western territory. Now, I saw both the older movie of this. I think there was one called Rooster Cogburn and the Lady, and then there was a more recent one that had, I think, Jeff Bridges in it. That was excellent. I loved that movie. And I have never read this novel. So this would definitely count for June on the Range, and I would like to just read it as a classic of American literature. I'm also reading around the United States, so this would definitely count for one of those. This starts out in Arkansas. So yeah, True Grit, hoping to get to that at some point. And then another one that would count for this, I think, would be a book called The Personal History of Rachel DuPree. This is a more modern book. This is by a woman called Ann Weisgarber. And I will just read you the description from inside this book because I know very little about it. I've had this book on my TBR forever. And actually, I purchased this after I had read another book by Ann Weisgarber that I loved, and that was called The Glovemaker. And this book I read a couple of winters ago, and every sort of November, December, I like to do a video on books for cold, long winter nights, and winter solstice. And so this takes place in the winter time out west, and it's really good, just really good. Get this book. But this one was written before that by Ann Weisgarber, and it says, an award-winning novel with incredible heart about life on the prairie as it's rarely been seen. When Rachel, hired help in a Chicago boarding house, falls in love with Isaac, the boarding house owner's son, he makes her a bargain. He'll marry her, but only if she gives up her 160 acres from the Homestead Act, so he can double his share. She agrees, and together they stake their claim in the forebodingly beautiful South Dakota Badlands. 14 years later, in the summer of 1917, so World War I is happening, the Caddo are bellowing with thirst. It hasn't rained in months, supplies have dwindled. Pregnant and struggling to feed her family, Rachel is isolated by more than just geography. She's determined to give her child the life they deserve, but she knows that her husband, a fiercely proud former Buffalo soldier, will never leave his ranch. Black families are rare in the West, and land means a measure of equality with the white man. Somehow Rachel must find the strength to do what is right for herself and her children, reminiscent of The Color Purple as well as the frontier novels of Laura Ingalls Wilder and Willa Cather. The Personal History of Rachel DuPree opens a window on the little-known history of African-American homesteaders and gives voice to an extraordinary heroine who embodies the spirit that built America. So that sounds good to me. So that's a possibility. I don't know if I would have time to read both True Grit and The Personal History of Rachel DuPree, but I think I might choose one of those. So, and if I end up not having time for either of those, I could certainly read a Western short story. Okay, on to the next book. Okay, so I do realize that the video is at risk of getting very, very long if I talk for so long a concentrated period of time on each book. So I'm going to sort of whip through all of the rest of them a bit quicker. I haven't read any of these, but I would love to read any of them, if that makes sense. And I've got a pile here. I've got some books which are older, and then I have a few which are newer. And so I think I will start with the older ones and the classics and the vintage ones, and then I will move on to the more modern ones. Another possibility is The Amazing Mrs. Pollifax by Dorothy Gillman. I usually love reading books like this in August as kind of a beach read, even though we don't have a beach here at the farm. But I do enjoy these as sort of summer reads. They're light, they're fun. I read The Unexpected Mrs. Pollifax a year ago in the summertime as well, and that was my introduction to Mrs. Pollifax, although I've known about Dorothy Gillman and Mrs. Pollifax for decades and decades. My mother used to have stacks and stacks of mysteries and like the Mary Stewarts, Phyllis Whitney, all of those next to her bed. And one of the authors that she grew to love was Dorothy Gillman, and I remember a stack of Dorothy Gillman novels next to my mom's bed in our old house when I was growing up. So I've known about Dorothy Gillman for years and years, and I did review The Unexpected Mrs. Pollifax last summer, and I think it's safe to say that I encouraged some other people to start reading her books, which I was very happy about. And so I'm really looking forward to going on to the second in the series. And it's kind of like she's really not a Miss Marple. She's a little bit more hip than that, but it's kind of like a 1960s hip Jessica Fletcher, someone like that. It's just really fun, and there are some recurring characters in these books. And then an author that I learned about from Lil of Lil's Vintage World is Elizabeth Taylor. And 1 year ago, I read Mrs. Palfrey at the Claremont. Loved it. Loved it. Like, I would put that among my top 20 books of all time, I think. And Lil had talked about another of Elizabeth Taylor's books, and that is called Blaming. And it seems like a good summery one to me. I'm sorry, this has a shiny cover, so my ring light is kind of shining on it, but I love these watercolor covers. And Blaming sounds super interesting. I'll read you the little blurb here. There's a woman called Amy. She's suddenly left widowed and alone while on holiday in Istanbul. And Martha, an American novelist, comforts her and accompanies her back to England. Upon their return, however, Amy is reluctant to maintain their relationship, recognizing that under any other circumstances the two women would not be friends. But guilt is a hard taskmaster, and Martha has a way of getting under one's skin. So I don't really know what that means, but I do remember that I've seen several good reviews of this novel. Looks like it would be a great summer read, and it's Elizabeth Taylor. You cannot go too far wrong because she's a smashing writer. Another book that I picked up, I am not familiar with this writer's work at all. I admit I bought it purely for the cover. And because I was buying Virago books, so I decided to get another one. So this is R in the Month by Nancy Spain, and this is also shiny. Sorry, so I will hold it like this. Look at this cover. That looks pretty summery to me, and I have a feeling this has a lot of humor in it. I believe Nancy Spain writes with humor. The Oyster Party had the kiss of death on it, even though there were 2 R's in the month. Miriam Birdseye, famed review star and sleuth, could have told you that from the start. She isn't a bit surprised to learn that her fiancé's mother died in the night, but who at the seedy Sussex hotel would have poisoned the bivalves? Could it be the hotel proprietor, a handsome bankrupt, his put-upon wife, Miriam's impressively mustachioed fiancé, or the menacing, unsavory chef? Find out in Nancy Spain's R in the Month. That sounds like such a fun book, and just especially like one to read for lightness, like a palate cleanser or what have you, in between something a little more serious and another serious one. This would be, I think, a lot of great fun. And I think Nancy Spain also wrote some nonfiction. I'm not sure about that. I may be wrong, but because I don't know much about her, but she's got several of these books. She also wrote one called Death Goes on Skis and another called Cinderella Goes to the Morgue. So those sound funny to me. But anyway, so that's Nancy Spain. Another classic that I would like to get to, kind of a forgotten vintage book that I was given as a gift for my birthday, was Blue Willow by Doris Gates. And it is also set in the Midwest, and it's about a girl, migrant workers who were itinerant, and they had to go from farm to farm to wherever the work was. The family had to pack up and go there and help. They were pickers. And the one possession that her family owns that this little girl in the story, Janie Larkin, that she loves is the blue willow plate, because it's like the one anchor she has to having a home someday. So I am looking forward to finally getting to read this. It's just a beautiful, beautiful vintage edition, and it's in plastic as a protection. Yeah, so there's that. And then just really, really quickly, 3 more. So one of the books that is a mid-grade book, it's historical fiction, and I know that Shelley Swearingen has a challenge to read historical fiction. Not sure when I will get to this, but this is middle grade historical fiction, and this is called The Luminous Life of Lucy Landrey. This is a library book, so forgive the shine from the plastic cover, and it is by Anna Rose Johnson. Now, I heard about Anna Rose Johnson from Kate Howe. Kate Howe had talked about another book by this author called The Star That Always Stays. And I did look at that book, and I do want to read that as well. But this one particularly intrigued me as a sort of a summer read. And it's about a girl named Lucy. Lucy is an orphan. She is of French Ojibwe descent. The story starts in the year 1912, which is one of my favorite time periods, the early 20th century, like from the Gilded Age, excuse me, the Gilded Age through like 1920. I love that time period that encompasses the First World War. More on that in a future video, but it's one of my favorite time periods. And so this is 1912, and this little girl named Lucy is sent to the shores of Lake Superior to live with a mysterious family of lighthouse keepers. And she gets to know the children there, and one thing she finds out is that offshore is the wreck of a famous ship. And so a mystery starts to unfold, and it's got children looking for lost treasure and shipwrecks in the Great Lakes. And I live below one of the Great Lakes, Lake Ontario. It's directly to the north of me. It's about a half-hour drive away. And so I'm all there. Sign me up for a book that is about finding lost treasure on one of the Great Lakes in the summertime. Yeah. And you know, there's so many books about white children and their summer adventures. I thought it would be really interesting to read about a girl of French Ojibwe descent and her adventures. And it's also, you know, so it's a way to read more about diverse characters, but it's also a way to read around the United States, which is another of the challenges I'm doing. And so this is set around Lake Superior. I think it's really cool. I'm very much looking forward to The Luminous Life of Lucy Landrey, and it's gotten very good reviews. It was an NPR Best Book of the Year. Final 2, we're on the home stretch. I'm not really going to go into details about these. I know very little about them, but they've been on my TBR forever. I would love to get to them this summer if I can. The first one is Sue Monk Kidd, The Secret Life of Bees. This is a library copy. This is supposed to be a very heartwarming story. I've always wanted to read it. I've never read anything by Sue Monk Kidd and would love to. So yeah, the tale of a motherless daughter's discovery of what family really means and of the strange and wondrous places we find love. So there's that. And finally, another book from my Read Around the World Challenge that would be great to get to this summer, but I don't know if I will. Again, this is a library book, so forgive the shine of the plastic, but this is The Island of Sea Women by Lisa C. And just the idea of women divers on an island, just I'm there. I'm sold already. I love this cover. I love the premise. I think it's really neat. And it's gotten really, really good reviews. I know several people personally who have read this and think it's a great read. So I am there for this one as well. Thank you for sticking with me through all of that. I know that was a lot of books to go through, but it was a big June haul, to be fair. I do still have a lot more books that I didn't even cover in this video, but I think I really need to stop here. These are just a pile of possibilities. Not sure how many I'll get to, but these are the titles that are exciting me right now and what I'm loving. And so I do hope to get through at least half of them. And if I feel the desire to do so, I will maybe post some book reviews about some of them. I will be back next week with another video, and I'm getting ready for Jane Austen July as well. So more to talk about that in the next few weeks. And enjoy your week, enjoy your weekend. Let me know what you're reading in the comments down below. Summer is such a fun time to read, isn't it? It's just great. Ever since you were a little kid and you had a summer reading list from school, isn't it just delicious? So let me know what you're reading in the comments down below. Give me some great recommendations, and we'll see you again real soon. Bye-bye.